going to try and introduce some information here related to the seminar, since we have a few people from the seminar attending this class. And we talked about going to a new series of supplements, so I thought I would add that in as well. So we'll have two subjects. And everyone has a handout on this is regarding the kind of a follow-up of, it's pertinent to people even if you don't have diabetes to understand this concept, because even if you don't have the diabetes that requires you to take medicine, you can still have damage from abnormal blood sugars. After every meal, if you're eating poor, choosing poor foods, your blood sugars will spike. And during that hour or two, while they are elevated above normal, they can be high enough so they can cause permanent damage to the elastic tissues in your body. These high blood sugars are not a trivial thing. We see what they do in diabetics when they stay there hour after hour all day long. And so I think this has relevance for the whole class, not just for people who are coming from the Diabetes Undone seminar. So I wanted to start with a thought from Scripture. This is the Apostle Paul saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, he says, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. I think in this class we try and talk about not just the facts, not just the information that can keep us in good health, but also the bigger picture of what motivates a person to want to be healthy. There's a lot of people who have chronic illnesses that have no motivation to do anything about it. Oh, they'll complain, they'll go to their doctor, they'll go through the motions of being bothered by their chronic illness, but they don't tap into a power. They seem to be like helpless in their own misery. That's usually a sign that there's an addiction going on, when a person chooses not to get help when they see how horrible the situation is that they're in. And so, since addictions are universally, not everyone who has a chronic disease has an addiction, but quite often that's the case. We try and direct people's thoughts to a higher power, because to break any addiction, if it's food or if it's some kind of drug, or there's millions of addictions that a person can really find themselves stuck in. Negative thinking can lead to the wrong reasons why you do unhealthy eating. And so you eat because it makes you feel good for a few seconds. So that can lead to an addiction of eating disorder. God has a power to overcome our addictions. And that's why we keep starting this class with a theme from God's Word. Because we don't want to just tell you to do better. We want to empower you to make it possible. Very few physicians have tapped into this, but it's now one of the questions you're supposed to ask somebody in med school. They teach you, when you do a history and physical, how do you ask the questions? To go through the history and physical, when you meet a patient, you have to ask certain questions to know all the information. And that's one of the questions is now about their spiritual history, because they've realized that is important to reaching a person, to reaching their, I guess, the core of what motivates them. And if you're not asking that, you're not going to know how to relate to them, what issues they may have. And at the heart of many of these issues like depression, there are spiritual questions that come in. How are you going to effectively treat that illness if you're not asking those right questions? And so I believe in this class this is overlooked in many cases, and so we try not to overlook that aspect. And encourage you all not just to read about God's Word, not just to hear about it, but to spend time in prayer talking to Him. Our health is not an option. God created us, and He calls us a temple of God. When He lives in us, we become His temple. as we provide a place for him to live, he's asking us to do something to make that temple honorable. And that means keep it as healthy as we can. With that motivation, all of a sudden we take a little more pride in what we do, a little more motivation, because we realize it's not just for us we're doing this. We're doing this for a higher power. And that's motivating like just facts about health will not motivate.
It's good motivation.
Absolutely.
It's the best of the best.
You tap into that every day and your day goes better. That's where it is. Gracious Father, we do thank you for the privilege of coming to you each day, inviting you to solve the problems we can't control, and leave you with the problems that are bigger than us. May we now each invite you into our hearts to motivate us to true health. May the information we learn now help us in this journey, we pray in Jesus' name. Okay. So this particular video is about blood sugar. And how does blood sugar affect us if we don't have diabetes? Well, everybody has a blood sugar level. After each meal, it's going to rise a little. What you ate for that meal will determine if it rises a normal amount or if it rises a very high amount. So we'd call it a spike if it went into the abnormal range. When it gets to the abnormal range, and it stays there for a while, you're having chemical reactions taking place in your body, whether you want to or not. If it gets really high, you're going to spill it into your urine. So for the average person, that's not usually happening. You can usually tell if it's spilling in your urine because you're drinking way more than 8 cups of water a day. And that usually happens only if you have diabetes itself. But you can go into the abnormal range for an hour or two after each meal if it was the simple carbohydrates. And not just the carbohydrates alone, but also what's mixed with them in that meal. And so in this video, he's talking about what we can eat or what we can add to the carbohydrates in a meal so that our blood sugars are more blunted. So a spike has a very sharp, rapid shape to the curve. But if it becomes more gradual, the peak levels never get there. It's a more gentle curve. And what that means is we're not pickling our body.
I'm sorry.
There is damage to our aorta. The wall of our aorta has elastic fibers. And if you take an old person's aorta, it's usually bigger than it should be, and it's usually crisp like an old garden hose. Or if you're a mechanic, you take out the hoses from the radiator, they're all crisp and hard. Our aorta becomes like that as a result of the high blood sugars pickling those elastic fibers. Once those sugar molecules bond permanently to the elastic fibers, they don't come off.
How long does it take to do that permanent damage? Several years or 6 months?
It usually takes on the order of years. And you can usually tell how much that has happened in your body by how bad your blood sugar pressure is. Because this leads to chronic essential hypertension.
And what if you do a lot of exercise? Does that counteract some of that?
It does. That's one of the reasons we encourage people to have after meal walk, because that will blunt the spike. Because you're using that sugar and changing the physiology of the whole process. So that's very helpful. You don't have to like sit an hour for digestion, 5 or 10 minutes after you've had your meal. We're not talking about marathons. Just some light walk around the block. And that will be enough to blunt that effect.
I've noticed that my blood pressure, since I've been changing my diet, has been coming down. And is that an indication that maybe I don't have that?
Well, put it this way, there's a combination of various things that lead to high blood pressure. What I just described about the stiffening aorta is one component. But your kidney and other organs get involved in regulating high blood pressure. And so I don't want people to think that if they have, let's say, blood pressure of 180, it's always going to be there because they've had that for years. By changing our diet, we change these other factors that are reversible. Some of this. So we may not get back to 110, which is a normal value for our systolic blood pressure, but we can improve it in that direction without medicines. And how much? Well, it often takes months to years to see that gradual, slow improvement. As we add more foods that have antioxidant properties, as we reduce the amount of animal protein in our diet, chronic inflammation is reduced. So our high blood pressure will go in a better direction. And so what you're saying is what everyone can experience, an improvement. And if you've had it for a shorter period of time, there's a greater chance it'll go closer to normal. If you're making these changes at 70, the aorta is stiffer, it's not going to reverse as well, and so you may still end up needing some medicine, but you probably won't need as much to reduce your blood pressure to a better level.
But it's safe to assume that that's an indication, because I too am here for the high blood pressure, that's one of my issues. When I see that going down, it's safe to assume that I'm now on the healing road. You know, instead of the going to die road, I've now moved to the healing road.
Absolutely.
Different.
If you decide to just do what you're doing, and historically have done, you'll probably follow the trend that everyone else has. Their blood pressure every year keeps rising by a few points above the year before. And it just keeps rising and rising. And with that comes all the risks that introduces. And it's kind of a barometer, a measure of the rest of our health, because it's not just high blood pressure alone that's occurring. It comes with inflammation of the heart, the arteries, the kidneys, all these other organs are affected, and the high blood pressure is simply an indication of how these other organs are also suffering. And so I think this is valuable information to apply, even if you're never diagnosed with diabetes, because we can still have high blood pressure. It may not be 200. Diabetics just have the numbers more exaggerated, so they may be a little more motivated to do something about them, but we all can, in this country are at risk for high blood pressure. So the amount of blood sugar in our diet is a factor in that. In all my reading, I've noticed those are the two things: the amount of animal protein and the amount of blood sugar, or spikes of the sugar. Those are the two factors that really affect them. How high your blood pressure will continue each day. Now, there's other smaller factors we've talked about, like abnormal levels to stress. The stress interacts with blood pressure. So we can do something about that as well. But some of the bigger changes we'll notice is blunting our blood sugars and reducing the animal protein in our diet will be the bigger factors to bring it back to normal.
I have a question. Blood pressure is affected by pain. Is the blood sugar affected by pain because it increases the stress level then?
It does. The stress level raises your cortisol levels. And so pain in the short term raises adrenaline, because your body's sensing there's something wrong, and so that adrenaline will raise your blood sugars in anticipation of a flight from some kind of danger. And so it'll bump up your blood sugars from that. Cortisol does that as well. If you've ever worked with diabetics, if they are given a short-term course of steroids for asthma or some other reason, their blood sugars go all to pieces when they're on steroids.
I just, well, I think that the blood sugar did increase, which I wasn't quite sure how.
Yeah.
You explain that really.
Yeah. So pain is a factor. It's probably not, most people aren't in severe pain for very long, and then they do something about it. So the effect of it in terms of your overall day is shorter. Because if you're in severe pain, it's kind of hard to function. All you're trying something to reduce the pain. All right. So let's see how we can go through this When we get to a chart in a video, I'll probably stop it so you can take a little more time, because he goes quick, because he knows people will probably review these videos, and it's hard to get all the information on your first viewing.
We saw how adding even steamed, skinless chicken breasts can exacerbate the insulin spike from white rice, but fish may be worse. Here's the insulin score of a low-carb plant food like peanuts, compared to common low-carb animal foods, eggs, cheese, and beef. But fish was even worse.
So he's comparing relative foods to the effect of our blood sugars. And sometimes we have these misconceptions, and it's best to always let the evidence speak. We think that certain foods are health promoting because they're advertised that way. But then we say the chart shows beef and fish at the worst end of the scale. Most people, you know, they eat beef because they like the taste of it. But they kind of know we should avoid eating red meat because that's what the advice keeps getting repeated. But nobody cautions us against eating fish. Unless you're pregnant, then the doctor might say, well, eat fish less than once a week because of the mercury. But here it's talking about you think, well, have you ever had the people, the dietitian, counseling you when you have diabetes? You get some educator talking to you about what to eat. And they usually don't tell you to avoid protein foods, because protein foods like fish don't affect or raise your blood sugars that day. Well, he's saying that may not be so true when you look at the details and you measure it carefully.
So what are we looking at again? I had to turn away to get some water.
Well,
Fish is the highest.
he's saying that its effect is worse than red meat.
Its effect on what, blood sugars? In a negative fashion?
Yeah.
How lovely. How lovely.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I haven't cut out yet.
So I'm not saying all or nothing. I'm just saying as you know this information, you may choose
I know.
to use smaller servings less often, and then you'll find other foods kind of replace that spot on your plate. Now, at first glance, you're thinking, well, how can fish do that? It's got no sugar in it. It makes no sense, but just because we don't understand all the mechanism doesn't mean it's not making a difference. So he's giving us the big picture. And of course, donuts.
Yeah, I wondered where donuts were. I wanted to see that they were on there somewhere.
Oh, darn.
Thank you.
He didn't spend much time on the donuts because it didn't need much explanation.
Great.
Okay. So on the left, the column says serum insulin. Serum is a term for what we measure in our blood. So if you take your blood sample, you take out the blood cells. What's left is the liquid that's in the blood. That's called the serum. And that's where all the hormones and proteins and so on in our blood travel. And so the blood sugar is in there. So the insulin levels in our blood can be measured by just repeated sampling of a subject. And so here he's going in time. So at time 0, somebody ate a meal, and then they're measuring. This is what we call the postprandial, which means after your meal, the elevation in blood sugar. So if it elevates really quickly, we call it a spike. And the higher, of course, that it goes, the more the reactions can take place that we talked about on the elastic fibers. So we want things that kind of give us a steady, even flat blood sugar, or around that peak, so that it never gets as high. Here's a potato.
Mashed white potatoes. Then what would happen if you added some tuna fish?
Of course.
You get twice the insulin spike.
So in your classes, you've probably been told to eat potatoes cautiously because they'll raise your blood sugar. But they don't tell you that the protein in your meal can make it twice as bad. That means you could eat twice as much of a potato and have the same effect. But people say, oh, eat very small servings of the potato. And so this is, in a sense, sharing the whole story. The rest of what's on their plate is just as important, even though it may not have any blood sugar in it. It's creating an environment in our body that treats the blood sugars abnormally.
They stay high longer too in that second line with the potato and the protein
Yeah.
over
It
time.
spikes higher, but the peak is much longer.
Yeah, it stays
So
high
you can
longer.
see how much more impact, or now you have twice as much time for your aorta to be pickled
Yeah, thank you.
because of the elevated blood sugar levels.
Are they talking animal protein or vegetable-based protein?
He will. This is fish.
This is fish.
But he's going to give you the same comparison with other. So it's not just protein alone, but the protein source does matter.
Okay.
Nice time.
Or spaghetti and white flour spaghetti with meat. The addition of animal protein may make the pancreas work twice as hard. You can do it with straight sugar water. If you do like a glucose challenge test to test for diabetes, where you drink a certain amount of sugar, this is the kind of spike in insulin you get. But if you take in the exact same amount of sugar, but with some meat added, you get this. And the more meat you add, the worse it gets. Just adding a little meat to carbs doesn't seem to do much, but once you get up to like a third of a chicken breast worth, you can elicit a significantly increased surge of insulin. So a chicken sandwich may aggravate the metabolic harm of the refined carb white bread it's on. But what about a PB&J? Well, we saw that adding nuts to Wonder Bread actually calms the insulin and blood sugar response. What if instead you smeared on an all-fruit strawberry jam? Berries have even more antioxidants than nuts, and can indeed squelch the oxidation of cholesterol in response to a typical American breakfast, and even reduce the amount of fat in your blood after the meal. And with less oxidation, there is less inflammation when berries are added to a meal. So a whole plant food source of sugar can decrease inflammation in response to an inflammatory stressor meal. What about a whole plant food source of fat? If you eat a burger with a half an avocado on top, within hours the level of an inflammatory biomarker goes up in your blood, but not as high as eating the burger without the avocado. This may be because all whole plant foods contain antioxidants which decrease inflammation, as well as fiber, which is one of the reasons even high-fat whole plant foods like nuts can lower cholesterol. And the same could be said for avocado. Significant drop in cholesterol levels, especially in those with high cholesterol, with even a drop in triglyceride.
So some of that information seems counterintuitive. Generally, when you add oil to a person's diet, it will increase your cholesterol, even though oil is not a cholesterol, but it has interaction with that. But here the fat that's coming from the avocado doesn't have any cholesterol in it. You only get cholesterol from plants, from animal sources or dairy. So here they're showing that avocados, for someone who already is high at the cholesterol level, is going to bring it down. For someone who's closer to normal, it may not be a noticeable effect, but it's definitely noticeable if you're already having high cholesterol. And so when you eat the protein that comes in the animals, it's not packaged with all these antioxidants. The plant sources have these antioxidants. So they haven't sorted out exactly what the mechanism is. But the bottom line, the advice they're giving you is more plants on your plate is going to give you a blood sugar and an insulin level that's closer toward the normal range.
With a meal decreases inflammation. What about drinking berries? Sipping wine with your white bread significantly blunts the blood sugar spike from the bread, but the alcohol increases the fat in the blood by about the same amount. If you eat some cheese and crackers, this is the triglycerides bump you get. If you sip some wine with the same snack, they shoot through the roof. Now we know it was the alcohol because if you use de-alcoholized red wine, non-alcoholic red wine, the same wine but with the alcohol removed, you don't get the same reaction. This has been shown about a half dozen other studies, along with an increase in inflammatory markers, so may help in some ways but not others. A similar paradoxical effect was found with exercise. If you have people cycle at high intensity for about an hour, a half day before drinking a milkshake, the triglycerides response is less than without the prior exercise, yet the inflammatory response to the meal appeared worse.
What does he mean when he's saying inflammatory response?
The body's reaction to it in a negative way, it's harming the body and it's reacting, right?
So there are certain markers of inflammation that you can measure in the serum, and they are telling us a big picture that something in the body created an environment of inflammation. Inflammation is something that is taking place with all diseases. Every single disease out there involves inflammation. So if you want the body to avoid chronic diseases, you want to reduce inflammation in the body. You can think of inflammation in a wound. Inflammation is helping in the healing process. But if the wound never heals, it just chronically festers like that, that means it will be chronically inflamed. Well, the same can happen in the rest of our organs. They can all be suffering chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation doesn't promote all the good things we want moving toward health. It doesn't lead to healthy blood sugars, doesn't lead to all the other markers of health. So the bottom line is we want to eat more foods that reduce inflammation levels, or we're going to end up having worse control of our blood sugars. And so here he's showing that exercise a day before. You think, well, how can exercise affect you that much later? But it really does. Short term, the body's physiology changed enough so that even a day later, you eat something like a milkshake, which has a lot of dairy in it, which creates chronic inflammation. He's showing that the response to that in your triglyceride levels is blunted. And so you think, well, that's a good thing. So we'll just keep exercising, we'll counteract the milkshakes, and we can have all the milkshakes if we just run enough around the block. Well, if that's true...
That's the milkshake diet, right?
Yeah. If that's so true, then how come the body is showing such poor response with all this elevated markers of inflammation? That tells us that,
Exercise,
that it didn't neutralize it completely. And so, even though on one, if you just focus on like a tunnel and look at just one piece of evidence, you might come to that conclusion, but it might not be the correct one. If you look at the other information, you realize, well, the milkshake still is hurting us in other ways, besides just a measure of our triglyceride levels in our blood. And it's promoting chronic inflammation. Well, what does that do to many people? If your mucous membranes in your sinuses and in your nasal passages and your throat are all inflamed, well, you know what it feels like when you have a case of serious allergies. Well, what if the allergies weren't so serious that you were all stopped up and you couldn't breathe and it's really stuffy? You get that chronically, and some people have that 24/7, 7 days a week, and it's there because of the food they eat. This one fellow, Doug Batchelor, I saw his video. Until he gave up ice cream, he didn't realize he had a chronic low-grade food allergy to ice cream. But he had it every single day, or every other day. He never went ice cream free until he finally realized that was his addiction. For him, he couldn't control it. I mean, he would drive 40 miles to get his pint of ice cream. That's when you know it's an addiction. And so when he gave that up, all his allergies cleared up. So that's what I mean by chronic low-grade inflammation. It's a kind of generic term, but when you apply to specific examples, then you can kind of get a grasp, well, inflammation is not something I really want. I don't want the hay fever, or if I'm going to have hay fever, I don't want it to be severe, maybe just low-grade and short-lived. This inflammatory response of your body, it gets out of proportion when you have other things pushing it toward inflammation. So instead of your allergies lasting 2 or 3 days, it might last 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months because of all the other foods that we are consuming that push toward creating more inflammation.
I'm having some allergic reactions that I never had before. I mean, it's like about 4 months now that I've been sort of weaning myself off my old food and moving into this new way of eating. And I'm finding that I'm having that reaction more and more often than I ever have before.
Well, this year, I would have to admit, normally I'm not affected by pollen very much. So this year in particular, I think it's all the extra rain, making the pollen levels way, way higher than previous years. And as a person gets older, I think our immune system is not necessarily as quick as a young person to react in a normal fashion. And so I've noticed my allergies kicking in. Fortunately, it cleared up after a week or two, but for me that was most unusual, to suffer like that. So some of it may be due to getting older. I think a lot of it has to do this spring with just the amount of pollen. Go ahead.
I've noticed that I've become extra sensitive to like going down the aisle at the supermarket